Imagine moving into your dream home, excited to start a new chapter with your family, only to discover that your biggest nightmare lives right next door, a neighbor so controlling, so obsessed with rules, that every little thing you do is watched, judged, and reported. She isn't just picky, she's relentless, and now your peaceful life is about to turn into a daily battle against the woman who will stop at nothing to make your life miserable.
It all began on a bright Saturday morning when the Johnson family finally moved into their long-awaited home in Maplewood Heights. The neighborhood looked perfect. Clean streets, white picket fences, and immaculately manicured lawns stretching as far as the eye could see. Tom and Lisa Johnson, along with their curious 10-year-old daughter Emma, were thrilled. This house wasn't just a building, it was a fresh start, a place to make memories, a dream come true. Little did they know, nestled among the flowers and freshly painted houses, lurked a storm in the form of Mrs. Karen Whitmore. She wasn't just any neighbor, she was the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer of HOA rules, the one everyone dreaded. For 20 years, Karen had scrutinized every minor detail, monitored every lawn, and judged every mailbox placement. If anything was slightly off, too tall, too colorful, too loud, Karen was ready to pounce. The Johnsons, busy unpacking and arranging furniture, didn't notice her at first, but the moment they stepped outside to stretch, there she was, standing on her perfectly trimmed lawn, arms crossed, glaring with a mix of suspicion and contempt. "I see we have new neighbors," she said, her voice sharp and measured. "I hope you understand the rules around here." Tom forced a polite smile. "Yes, ma'am, we've read through the HOA guidelines and we'll do our best to follow them." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "We'll see," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Maplewood Heights isn't like other neighborhoods. I make sure everyone follows the rules, and I don't tolerate mistakes." From that moment, the Johnsons realized that life here wasn't going to be the peaceful haven they had imagined. The first incident came almost immediately. Karen marched over one morning, pointing at a tiny flower bed near the Johnsons' driveway. "Your flowers are encroaching on the sidewalk," she demanded. "HOA regulations clearly state that plantings cannot extend beyond 3 inches from the property line. Fix it immediately, or I'll file a complaint." Lisa, flustered but polite, apologized. "Oh, we didn't realize. We'll trim them right away." But it wasn't just about flowers. Karen's obsession escalated quickly. Trash cans left out a few minutes too long, a slightly crooked mailbox, or even a garden gnome that didn't meet her aesthetic. Every minor detail became a battleground. Complaints were filed, calls were made, and the Johnsons' simple attempts at normal life were met with scrutiny and disapproval. Even Emma noticed the tension. One evening, while helping water the garden, she asked softly, "Mom, why does that lady seem to hate us?" Lisa sighed, trying to explain without frightening her. "She doesn't hate us, honey. She just likes to control everything, and we're new here, so we're easy targets." Tom felt a quiet anger building inside him. He wanted to lash out, but he knew that reacting in anger would play into Karen's hands. Instead, he began to observe, to document, and to plan. Every interaction, every visit, every complaint was carefully noted. He wasn't going to let Karen win. Then came the first big test. The Johnsons hosted a small, friendly barbecue to meet a few neighbors. The gathering was modest, soft music, a few chairs, and a small grill, but it was enough to catch Karen's attention. She stormed over, her face a mask of outrage. "I can't believe you're doing this," she shouted. "I've called the HOA. You're going to be fined." Neighbors tried to calm her, but Karen was relentless. She demanded that the music be turned off, chairs removed, and even threatened fines for minor infractions she claimed existed. The Johnsons were stunned. They had done everything by the book, yet Karen found a reason to attack. Tom took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Mrs. Whitmore, we understand you care about the neighborhood, but threatening us and calling the HOA over something so minor crosses a line. We'll follow the rules, but we won't tolerate personal attacks." Karen blinked in disbelief. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. She was used to fear and submission. The Johnsons' calm defiance rattled her. That evening, as the family cleaned up from the barbecue, they shared a quiet moment in the backyard. "We need to be smart," Tom said. "We can't let her make our lives miserable, but we can document everything and plan our response." Lisa nodded. "Patience, strategy, and evidence. That's how we win." Emma, still concerned, asked, "Does that mean she'll keep bothering us?" Tom smiled gently. "Maybe, but we won't let her control us. Not anymore." The air hung heavy with tension, but there was also a sense of resolve. The Johnsons weren't just surviving. They were preparing to take back control of their lives. And while Karen believed she had the neighborhood in her grip, the seeds of change were quietly being planted.
When patience and clever planning meet relentless bullying, even the most obsessive neighbor can be caught off guard. In the days following the barbecue, the Johnsons quietly began to take control of the situation. Karen's constant inspections and petty complaints had been relentless, but Tom and Lisa knew that reacting impulsively would only fuel her obsession. Instead, they focused on preparation, patience, and strategy. Every phone call from Karen, every note left on their door, every complaint to the HOA was carefully logged with dates, times, and photos. Even Emma joined in, photographing Karen's increasingly absurd patrols from inside the house, giggling as she pointed out how the neighbors seemed to appear at the most inconvenient times. The Johnsons also started talking to other neighbors who had quietly endured Karen's tyranny for years. One by one, stories emerged of absurd fines, petty arguments over trivial matters, and unnecessary inspections. The Johnsons listened carefully, realizing that the issue was not just personal, it was a pattern, and the neighborhood had been silently suffering under Karen's obsessive control. It was during one particularly sunny Saturday morning that the first opportunity to strike presented itself. Karen had noticed a small deviation in the Johnsons' backyard, a decorative birdbath slightly off-center, and immediately called the HOA, expecting them to act on her complaint. But the Johnsons were ready. Tom answered the call politely, calmly explaining the situation to the HOA and providing photographic proof that there was no violation. He mentioned the repeated harassment and that the Johnsons were documenting every interaction. For the first time, the HOA staff hesitated. Karen's carefully cultivated image as the neighbor enforcer had been undermined by concrete evidence. Tom's calm, organized approach made her obsessive complaints appear petty and unwarranted. Meanwhile, Emma contributed in her own clever way. She created a small neighborhood watch chart, tracking when Karen appeared to patrol yards and noting her most ridiculous complaints. The chart, displayed subtly in their front window, drew the attention of passers-by. Karen noticed almost immediately, her eyes narrowing in fury at the seemingly innocent display. But the Johnsons knew that humor, when paired with evidence, could be a powerful tool. As the week progressed, Karen's frustration grew. She found herself constantly monitored, her every move documented. She stormed over to lecture about lawn lengths, mailbox positions, and even the angle of garden statues, but each time, Tom and Lisa responded with calm logic and proof that her accusations were baseless. Her fury deepened, her usual intimidation tactics were ineffective. Then came another small gathering. The Johnsons invited a few neighbors over for coffee and snacks, a casual, friendly event, but they had prepared a subtle surprise. Hidden cameras captured every outrageous complaint Karen made during her unannounced inspections, every shriek over noise, every hand-waving rant about non-existent violations, and every absurd threat to call the HOA was recorded in perfect clarity. The following day, Tom and Lisa discreetly shared the footage with neighbors who had experienced similar harassment. Gasps and stifled laughter spread as Karen's obsessive behavior was revealed in full. Her reputation, once untouchable, began to crumble as people saw the reality of her extreme vigilance. Karen, of course, noticed the shift. Neighbors who once quietly obeyed her commands now smiled knowingly, exchanged small jokes, and occasionally questioned her judgment. The balance of power had begun to tilt. Karen, ever obsessive, tried to regain control by sending another round of emails to the HOA demanding fines and warnings for the Johnsons. But this time, her claims were dismissed immediately. The HOA staff had seen the evidence. The Johnsons were beyond reproach. It was a subtle victory, but a critical one. The Johnsons had not only defended themselves, they had turned the tables. They had shown that patience, organization, and strategy could neutralize even the most relentless bully. The neighborhood atmosphere began to change. People who had been intimidated by Karen for years began to speak up, subtly reclaiming their own spaces and rights. And through it all, the Johnsons maintained their calm demeanor, never resorting to public shaming, but letting facts, humor, and clever planning do the work. Evenings were spent quietly plotting small legal and strategic moves, minor adjustments to gardens, small community gatherings, and documented acts of neighborly cooperation. Karen, increasingly frustrated, found herself isolated despite her attempts to control every detail. And as the days passed, the Johnsons' careful approach continued to pay off. Karen's influence over the neighborhood waned, her threats fell on deaf ears, and the community began to see the power of unity, strategy, and standing up without aggression. The Johnsons had transformed the situation. What began as a nightmare under the constant scrutiny of an obsessive neighbor had now become a demonstration of clever resilience and subtle power. The stage was set for the neighborhood to reclaim peace and for Karen to finally face the consequences of her relentless obsession.
Even the most controlling neighbor can be undone when patience, clever planning, and a united community come together. The tension in Maplewood Heights had shifted. Karen Whitmore, once the undisputed enforcer of HOA rules, found herself on uncertain ground. Her constant patrols, complaints, and intimidation attempts were no longer effective. The Johnsons had turned the tables, documenting every over-the-top tantrum, rallying support from neighbors, and proving her harassment for what it truly was: obsessive, petty, and unwarranted. It all came to a head during the next HOA board meeting. Karen arrived with her usual confidence, clutching a stack of complaint forms, prepared to demonstrate the Johnsons' supposed violations. She spoke with authority, listing every minor infraction she could find, from garden gnomes at odd angles to slightly overgrown hedges. But the board was no longer swayed by her theatrics. Tom and Lisa presented a meticulously organized file: photographs, videos, logs, and witness statements from multiple neighbors. Every complaint Karen had filed was disproven, and her own behavior was clearly captured on video. The room went quiet as the board reviewed the evidence. Karen's confidence faltered. Her usual smirk vanished. One member, Mrs. Alvarez, spoke calmly but firmly. "Karen, your actions toward the Johnson family have been excessive. We are dismissing all complaints and cautioning you that future harassment will not be tolerated." Karen's face turned red, and for the first time she realized her grip on the neighborhood was slipping. Her voice trembled as she attempted to argue, but the board's attention had entirely shifted. Her power, painstakingly cultivated over decades, was unraveling before her eyes. Meanwhile, the Johnsons were already planning a subtle yet effective community move. They organized a small Neighborhood Appreciation Day, framing it as a casual celebration of community and togetherness. It was a simple gathering: food, music, laughter, but it had a purpose. Neighbors who had quietly suffered under Karen's obsession were invited, creating a united front. Karen arrived, expecting to dominate the event, scrutinize every detail, and reassert her control. But she was met with something unexpected: laughter, smiles, and casual, polite remarks that cleverly highlighted her obsession with rules. Someone joked about her ever-watchful eye. Another mockingly asked if she had brought her measuring tape to ensure decorations were compliant. Karen fumed, unable to regain her usual authority. Then came the final touch. The Johnsons played a compilation video on a projector, showcasing Karen's most absurd and over-the-top actions: yelling at harmless dogs, inspecting lawns for microscopic deviations, and arguing about trivial matters like the angle of garden statues. Neighbors watched, laughed, and whispered among themselves. Karen froze, mortified as her obsession was laid bare for everyone to see. Her storming off was silent but dramatic, her empire of control shattered. The Johnsons had not only defended themselves, they had united the community, turning Karen's obsession into a source of humor and a lesson in humility. In the following weeks, Karen's attempts to assert influence dwindled. The HOA no longer prioritized her complaints. Neighbors subtly but firmly ignored her attempts to intimidate, and the Johnsons continued to thrive in their home, confident and undisturbed. Maplewood Heights had transformed. What was once a neighborhood dominated by fear and petty rules was now defined by fairness, unity, and subtle cleverness. Even Emma noticed the change. "Mom, Dad, she's not bothering anyone anymore," she said, smiling as she played in the yard. Tom nodded, a quiet pride in his eyes. "Sometimes the best way to win isn't with anger or shouting. It's with patience, planning, and standing together." And while Karen retreated into her house, plotting silently, everyone in Maplewood Heights knew one thing: no bully, no matter how controlling or obsessive, could dominate a united, clever, and resilient community. The Johnsons had proven that even the most relentless neighbor could be faced down with strategy, patience, and a little bit of ingenuity. Life in Maplewood Heights returned to a sense of calm. Gardens bloomed, lawns stayed neat, and neighbors finally felt free to live without constant surveillance. The Johnsons' quiet courage had restored not just their own peace, but the integrity of an entire neighborhood.